I need to remind you what is out there?
Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Psychology Unbound. Episode 2 is here, and it's gonna be a wild ride. I'm Moone, your guide into the minds of the most unforgettable characters in gaming, and today we're diving deep into one of the most badass, emotionally complex, and unforgettable characters ever created. Ellie Williams from The Last of Us. Let's get into it. In today's episode, we're focusing on the video game version of Ellie. While HBO's adaptation is visually stunning and emotionally powerful in its own right, it's Ellie's original debut that gives us the deepest look into who she is. This version is packed with detail, nuance, and raw emotion, and that's where we'll be pulling most of our insight. That said, there are some striking parallels between the two portrayals, and tons of love go to both Ashley Johnson and Bella Ramsey for absolutely pulverizing my heart with this beautifully tragic character. Now, let's dive headfirst into the brutal, fungal-infested dystopia that is The Last of Us. The nightmare began in South Africa. Before the world could even blink, the cordyceps fungus had already taken hold and spread like wildfire. Through a crumbled copy of the Texas Herald dated September 26, 2013, we learned that the FDA launched an investigation revealing crops contaminated with a strange, insidious mold. The worst part? Those tainted goods had already crossed borders, shipped from country to country, slipping into global circulation. Despite desperate recalls and frantic efforts to pull products from shelves, the damage was already done. In just a matter of months, nearly 60% of the world's population was wiped out, either consumed by the infection or lost to the chaos that followed. There are 4 stages of infection. Stage 1 takes place between a few hours and as long as 2 days after infection, depending on where the person was bitten, their current health, and their age. During this time, the host loses their higher brain functions, causing them to become hyper-aggressive and incapable of rational thought, setting the stage for what we would call runners. Stage 2, stalkers, occurs within 2 weeks of infection. This is where the fungus starts to alter sight and fungal growths appear on the host's head. Stage 3, clickers, occurs a year after infection when the host's face becomes scarred and they are fully blinded by the fungus, thus developing a need for echolocation to compensate. If the host survives for around a decade, Stage 4 causes hardened fungal plates to form all over their body, and they become even more aggressive, creating what we would call bloaters. There are a few variants, such as the Rat King and Shamblers, but these are based on environmental factors the fungus grows in. Eventually, the fungus will kill off the host, and the body will grow stalk-like fungal projections that release infectious spores. Cordyceps seem to have a hard time growing in the countryside and prefer underground environments and enclosed areas, much like real-life fungi. Also, much like this counterpart, this fungus is incredibly resistant, so it's not really picky about where it grows. With the groundwork of this world placed, let's get to the hero of today's episode. Ellie Williams was born in the spring of 2019 into a world gasping its last breath. The cordyceps infection had gone global, and society as we know it has collapsed beyond recognition. Her mother, Anna, died the very day Ellie was born, leaving her in the hands of her closest friend, Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies. Marlene made a promise to protect her, but knowing the dangers of raising a child within a rebel faction, she made the heartbreaking choice to give Ellie up, hoping she'd have a better chance of surviving somewhere safer. The two wouldn't cross paths again until Ellie was 13. In the meantime, Ellie grew up in the Boston quarantine zone, an unforgiving, militarized city governed by fear and control. To her, the world before the outbreak is nothing but myth and rubble. She was raised in the shadow of infection, shaped by violence, loss, and the remnants of a world that used to be. In the comic American Dreams, a 4-issue miniseries taking place before the game, we get some info on what life was like for Ellie before we meet her in-game. I'm including the comic information only because it was written by The Last of Us lead writer and creative director, Neil Druckmann, and ties into both the main game and its DLC Left Behind. This is where we are introduced to Riley, Ellie's best friend, and occasional kissing buddy. Their lives are filled with typical childhood events, like being raised in a militaristic group and having the first few years of their lives being treated like basic training. You know, the usual. But considering that this is an apocalypse, they are both as safe as they can be. They are protected by massive walls, armed guards roam the street at night, and only occasionally does a terrorist threat breach the walls. The infected don't do much to affect their lives until well into their teenage years. After a chance encounter with Marlene and the Fireflies beyond the walls, Marlene tells Ellie about her mother's death and the promise she swore to Anna. After this encounter, Ellie suggests running away from the zone, but Riley warns her that if they leave now, all that awaits them outside these walls is death. This brings us to the DLC Left Behind. Ellie and Riley have parted ways after a heated argument a month prior to the DLC, and Ellie assumes that Riley has long since been killed after running away from the military zone. We learn here that Ellie is a loner. She doesn't make friends easily, nor does she really want to. She's a rough around the edges person and is a target for bullying, despite kind of being a bully herself. After sneaking into the military zone, Riley and Ellie reunite, but during this time together, they are bitten in the process. Knowing that this means certain death, the two choose to wait together until the end comes. The thing is, only Riley gets worse with time, and Ellie is struck with a harsh realization. She has discovered her immunity to the virus. Fast forward 3 weeks, and here comes Joel and Tess. For the first time, Ellie truly goes outside the boundaries of the zones she's lived in. It's not long before danger comes their way, and we say goodbye to Tess. Ellie expresses her guilt about being the reason why Tess was killed, but Joel doesn't respond. This continues to be a tense subject throughout the series. They continue their journey in delivering Ellie to the Fireflies, and from their banter, we learn many of Ellie's interests along the way. She's an avid comic fan, she likes music, can ride a horse, and she's pretty handy with firearms. She puts this to the test when she saves Joel from a hunter whom she has to put down to save Joel's life. This is presumably the first life she's had to take outside of those who have been infected. We don't get to know if Ellie had to put down Riley or not. I believe this is the case. I don't think she would have left Riley to roam as an infected. In the TV show, she admits to putting Riley down and a young man before her, but that's a separate universe, so we can't say for certain. Continuing on her journey, she gets acquainted with her fellow survivors, Henry and Sam. While there's a spark of hope that maybe there is some good in the world, it all ends the same. They meet their end, while Joel and Ellie have to keep moving forward. The mission comes to a sharp halt when Joel gets injured during their time at the University of Eastern Colorado, and Ellie is forced to take care of him for weeks on end. During this time, Ellie truly strengthens her skills at survival as she is the sole provider for these two. She picks up hunting, tracking, and is her own one-woman army when nursing Joel back to health. Then along comes David. Everything she's learned up to this point is utilized in fighting off this group of cannibals. This is one of the darkest moments in Ellie's life. She has no one left to rescue her. She has Joel relying on her, and these strangers are looking to either assault her or cannibalize her. David is very clearly a hebephile, an adult who has a sexual interest in prepubescent children, and Ellie quickly becomes aware of this. So she's left with two options: fight or die, and boy does she put up a hell of a fight. After this arc, we near the endgame. Joel and Ellie make it to the Fireflies, and everything comes to a standstill. As the only person immune to the cordyceps, Ellie is the one hope for a cure. But to get this cure, the Fireflies will have to perform brain surgery, which would ultimately end her life. Ellie decides to continue with the surgery so humanity can have a chance for a cure. She comes to terms with her end, and she's put under for surgery. Hours later, she wakes up, confused. This is not what she expected. We conclude the game with Joel driving her back to the world she thought she left behind, and making up a lie to comfort her. Joel is the new monster in this story. But that depends on the perspective. This is the story of The Last of Us Part 1, and dear God does it get worse. Way worse. Ellie grows up and continues to be a badass. Part 2 takes place 5 years after the first game, and Ellie is 19 at the start of Part 2. She's found a place to call home in Jackson, and despite her combative nature, she has become quite popular in the community, with both adults and kids alike. Things here are good. There's peace and opportunities to have a life rather than just survive. Ellie has a small posse of her own consisting of Tommy, Jesse, her future girlfriend Dina, and a small cast of others. Things aren't all peachy in Jasper though. Ellie faces a homophobic attack from one of her fellow survivors, which leads to a fight breaking out. Joel rushes to help her, but the relationship is, shall we say, strained, so she snaps at him. Ellie knows Joel lied to her, so she later confronts him, shouting about how Joel robbed her life of meaning by taking away her chance at bringing about a cure. She doesn't forgive him, but she wants to try. Following day, Joel goes missing, and this is where the cycle of vengeance begins. Ellie stumbles across Abby and her fellow wolves, and is witness to Joel's brutal torture and murder. Here enters the feral Ellie arc. Ellie goes on a quest for vengeance, and one by one she kills off the people responsible for Joel's death. Everything comes in rapid succession. Nothing will stop Ellie on this path despite Dina's best attempts to stop her. This is until Ellie confronts Owen and Mel in the aquarium. She pleads with them to get Abby's location. Owen intervenes and is shot by Ellie. She proceeds to stab Mel in the following moments. This is where Ellie cracks. Mel was pregnant. Horrified by her actions, Ellie suffers a panic attack and is only pulled to her senses after Tommy and Jesse come into the scene. The three of them make it back to safety, and Ellie comes to terms with the idea of letting Abby go. It's not what she wants, but too many people have died to make this worth it. It'll only bring their downfall. Moments later, it does. Abby finds their secret hideout and guns down both Jesse and Tommy. She breaks Ellie's arm and beats both Ellie and Dina nearly to death. No one is a winner in this game of revenge. Ellie, Dina, and a physically disabled Tommy make it back to Jackson. Dina gives birth to her child, JJ, and the three of them quietly settle on a farm. Ellie is the most broken we've ever seen her. She suffers from PTSD, difficulty eating, insomnia, panic attacks, and flashbacks to Joel's torture. Months pass and Tommy goes to visit Ellie at her farm. He reveals that Abby and her new sidekick Lev have been spotted in Santa Barbara and reminds Ellie of the promise she made to him. She will kill Abby for what she did to Joel. Later that night, Ellie packs her things and leaves a devastated Dina behind. She travels on foot for months to catch up to Abby, and eventually she finds her being held captive by a savage group called the Rattlers. Ellie finds Abby in a severely deteriorated state and initiates their final confrontation with one another. Abby bites off two of Ellie's fingers, but despite this, Ellie gets the upper hand and gains the position to take Abby's life. Then, in an epiphany, Ellie remembers Joel playing his guitar. She lets go of Abby, and her quest is over. Ellie spares the life of the woman who has caused her years of torment and misery. Abby and Lev leave the scene, and Ellie is left alone on the beach. Ellie's quest for vengeance leaves her utterly alone in this world. Her friends are dead, her partner chose a life without violence, and her father figure has long since grown cold in the ground. Thus concludes The Last of Us Part 2. As a storyteller and gamer, I absolutely love this series. There's a lot of hate for Part 2 because of how Naughty Dog paces its storytelling. While I can agree with some of this game is like no other. It beautifully weaves this ever-growing tale of revenge, and it doesn't hold anything back in its repercussions. Ellie is a tragic hero, and her story isn't a happy one. We are left with a broken woman trying to pick up the pieces of her life, and I'd argue that she may be one of the most traumatized characters in gaming history. She concludes Part 2 in a way that shows us that she'll keep moving forward despite all the evil she's faced. As we finish the summary of Ellie's story, what are we taking a look at today? There's certainly no lack of trauma within this series, so what psychological aspects are we focusing on? Well, let's begin with her upbringing. Let's take a look at the psychological effects of being raised as an orphan in a war zone. Next, how does killing affect the psyche of someone fighting for survival? Lastly, what is monophobia and why is it Ellie's greatest fear? As with all of our research on this channel, we turn to peer-reviewed psychological studies, which are all the more difficult to access due to, shall we say, recent actions taken by the US government. But even so, there have been plenty of studies conducted across the globe on the effect of going through childhood as an orphan. Ellie never had a parental figure in her life besides Joel. Up until the two of them meet, Ellie has had a militaristic upbringing which has cultivated her as a survivor in a broken world. There's been no warmth given to her. Her childhood was structured with a very minimal education. For Ellie, it's always been just her. Everyone is trying to survive on their own. In many ways, she never even had a childhood. A study conducted in 2023 has some significant findings in regards to the emotional toll that can come from being an orphan. This study, involving 200 orphans, 153 of them being male and 47 female, utilized self-report measures. These reported a significant relationship between frustration and psychological distress. This is defined by the American Psychological Association as excruciating physical and mental symptoms related to normal variations of mood. Put simply, stress, anxiety, and depression can be characteristics of psychological distress. From what we can see during the game, Ellie fits all of these characteristics. When we are first introduced to Ellie, she is slow to trust and clearly unhappy with her situation. She doesn't want to follow some strange man around in a world that's only just been introduced to her. She was supposed to follow Marlene to the Fireflies, not this random dude. For the most part, she's been stuck in a militarized zone or just on the outskirts of them. Being beyond the walls is an entirely new experience for her, one that is full of new dangers. This study highlights autonomy frustration. This is when an individual wants to make decisions and choices but is denied. This leaves the victim feeling rejected and controlled. For Ellie to grow up in a militarized zone, there's not much personal autonomy she would have, especially as a child. With a strict schedule and harsh rule running the zone, Ellie hasn't had much choice in her life as a child surviving in this scenario. We are all well aware of her temper and outbursts, most of which are coded in teenage rebellion. Still, Ellie is a product of her environment. In regard to the study, we can see how this lack of autonomy has evolved Ellie into a frustrated minor, especially during her early interactions with Joel and Tess. Ellie and Joel have multiple exchanges with one another, telling each other they are both just means to an end. She can't stand him, and the last thing he wants is someone around him who can remind him of his daughter.
So what's the deal with you and Marlene anyways?
I don't know. She's my friend, I guess.
Your friend, huh? You're friends with the leader of the Fireflies. What are you, like, 12?
She knew my mom, and she's been looking after me. And I'm 14. Not that that has anything to do with anything.
So where are your parents?
Where are anyone's parents? They've been gone a long, long time.
So instead of just staying in school, you decide to run off and join the Fireflies, is that it?
Look, I'm not supposed to tell you why you're smuggling me, if that's what you're getting at.
You wanna know the best thing about my job? I don't gotta know why. To be honest with you, I give two shits what you're up to.
Well, great.
Good.
Joel directs her every move for a good while. She has to abide by his rules. Whatever he say, goes. She obeys begrudgingly, but only because she's aware Joel's more about this world than her. For the first time, she's not under an oppressive rule. It's just her and Joel. With this newfound freedom, Ellie learns her way of doing things, and her personality begins to flourish the longer she's out in the world. Further results from this study's participants found avoidance-focused coping and emotion-focused coping were significant predictors of psychological distress. Which means what, exactly? Well, in the orphanage the study investigated, most of the children involved often used these styles of coping as a way of making it day-to-day. Avoidance-focused coping is a way of denying and avoiding anything dealing directly with the stressful demands of life. Emotion-focused coping, or precisely in this behavior, behavioral disengagement, is the act of giving up the attempt to deal with the issue bothering you and letting it take over. These negative coping strategies will increase one's stress level and ultimately affect their well-being. The boys at this orphanage often turned towards self-humor and self-blame, whereas girls often self-blamed and used religion for coping. Isn't it interesting that humor was found as a coping strategy? Isn't it also interesting that Ellie just so happens to flex her funny bone quite frequently in the game? She's one of the only characters who makes jokes in this series. Ellie didn't turn to religion as a way of coping with the stresses of life, but she has certainly used comedy as a way of coping. Such as, after taking her first life, she has the unforgettable line of,
I shot the hell out of that guy, huh?
While innocent on the surface, these are coping mechanisms that can be predictors of depression and anxiety. While women often turn to social support as a coping strategy, Ellie is more similar to her male counterparts and tries to take control of the situation as best she can. It's made abundantly clear to us that Ellie is a deeply troubled child and adult as we make it to part 2. Over time, she makes a social circle that she slowly opens up to and can reveal some of her dark feelings. Ellie never fully allows herself to open up. She boxes up her problems, as we see with Sam and Henry. After they are buried, Ellie gets quiet, and while we see that this has put a heavy weight on her shoulders, we continue to move forward. They are never mentioned again. That seems pretty avoidant to me. As Ellie grows more accustomed to living in Jackson, she finally has the opportunity to grow with her trauma. She'll never get over it, but at least there is more to life now. Once Joel dies, however, so does her way of life. After giving up her mission the first time, after, that part of the story in the theater, she tries to continue on with her life, move on, and try to get past this trauma, but she can't. She doesn't even know how to live in this world with the consequences of her actions. That's why she chooses to go after Abby the second time, rather than stay with Dina and baby JJ. Her new ways of coping are gone, her father figure is dead, and her social circle soon follows. Life for Ellie is just like it was at the start of this journey. She's all alone with no direction on what to do next. Being an orphan isn't the sole reason for her hardship in life, but she's molded by her upbringing, as are all of us. If you've never had someone to love and care for you in the way that a successful parental figure or guardian can, then it's difficult to allow someone to step into a similar role later in life. Moving to our next point, Ellie's entire world revolves around death. Not a day passes when she doesn't carry her knife with her in case something happens. She took her first life at 13, and her kill count quickly makes it to the dozens. While all of these kills have been made out of self-defense until part 2, what does taking a life do to someone? Is there a difference between the act of self-defense and murder? In the world of The Last of Us, the act of taking a life is much different than in our world. In a civilized world, we as a society don't have to kill people for survival on a day-to-day basis. In the world of an apocalypse, however, it can be a kill or be killed world. We don't go far to personify those who aren't in our group. We are the good guys and they are the bad guys. And if you include parasitic humans coming after you, it can be even easier to justify one's actions. In the Last of Us society, you aren't viewed as a bad guy for killing another human. If you've survived for years, it's kind of assumed that you've killed at least one person in your life. Whereas in our world, even in the case of self-defense, the victim can still be ridiculed as a murderer. There was a study conducted in 2011 on 400 police officers, 68% of whom reported being exposed to at least one event where they felt a direct threat on their lives. Of these 400 officers, 39 of them reported having to kill or seriously injure someone in the line of duty. As you can guess, PTSD and depression were common symptoms after the traumatic event. Similar findings can be found in studies with veterans who have killed while in service. This is where we find a big obstacle in science. Several limitations are found in this study and any study revolving around traumatic experiences. There is a stigma associated with use of force that may limit the participants' willingness to disclose their experiences. Even while being anonymous, if one of the participants feels like they may get removed from the force by detailing how traumatized they are, or even a lack thereof, they may minimize their experience. This concept has as many social implications as it does personal. In the world of The Last of Us, if you're not capable of putting down an aggressor, you may not get work in the zone to feed your family. The act of killing is minimized. The weight of taking a life is just considered part of the job and not something that could traumatize someone for the rest of their life. Exterminating a human is treated in the same way as exterminators take care of unwanted pests. Because of this, one's self-image will change. The security of one's life will be non-existent, and even in safe zones, no one will ever be safe. Now, what about raiders and those taking advantage of the dilapidated world? Those who purposefully go out looking to end someone's life. In TV shows and films, killers tend to have a certain stereotype for their psychopathy. Usually they are either psychopathic, sociopathic, or antisocial. Typically, these killers have what Hervey Cleckley, an American psychiatrist, calls a mask of sanity. In The Last of Us, there is no clear boundary between killers and non-killers. Don't forget, Joel has done some terrible things to get by after his daughter died. In another character's life, he is the typical villain, stealing things from people and taking lives for one job or another. What makes Joel any different than David? Sure, Joel is doing his best to turn a new leaf, but isn't David also doing what he thinks is best to survive and prosper? Morality is all a construct, one that can only thrive in a civilized world. In a study from 1997, some of the earliest functional neuroimaging studies that examined homicide offenders found that the murderers in their study were characterized by reduced activity in the brain, in the lateral and medial prefrontal cortex areas, as well as the medial temporal regions, which includes the amygdala. The lateral prefrontal cortex is mainly responsible for higher order functions like integrating our motor activity with our senses, but it also works as something of a bridge between cognitive and emotional modulation. How about the medial prefrontal cortex? Well, that also plays essential roles in the cognitive process, emotional regulation, and sociability. How about the good old amygdala? You guessed it. One of its major tasks is as the processing center of emotions. In a more recent study in 2014, a research team reported that incarcerated adolescents in their study who had committed homicide showed reduced gray matter in the medial and lateral anterior temporal lobe and insula. The temporal lobe is responsible for language comprehension, emotional regulation, and memory. As for the insula, it's important in our risk-reward behavior. This rewards actions that bring you value and pleasure, which can also be associated with impulsivity and awareness of the body and self. You see the trend here? Having reduced activity or gray matter does not allow the brain to work at its best capabilities. Seeing as many of the murderers involved in these studies had reduced activity in the areas responsible for emotional regulation and their reward centers, it appears that their actions could have been heavily influenced by emotional backing. Humans are emotional beings. Our hearts, rather than our heads, can often be the catalyst for our actions. But does this mean that everyone who commits murder has these issues with their emotional capabilities? No, of course not. Not every killer has an antisocial disorder, and not every psychopath commits murder. In my opinion, especially in an apocalypse, it's not so much of an issue with the brain that turns people to kill, but a matter of circumstance. Heinous acts like these, the concepts of good and evil, all lie within a social paradigm. There's a paradigm shift that occurs at the end of the world. The values we hold dear change. You can't just go out to the grocery store to get food anymore. If you see anyone outside a safe zone, they very well may just kill you. You aren't viewed as a human anymore. You're a potential resource. There will continue to be good people out there, like Sam and Henry, but we all remember how that went. Even the best people can turn on you. As the game progresses, we get to see just how violent Ellie can be. Part 2 is way more graphic than its predecessor, and Ellie is vicious in her quest for vengeance. Her style of killing is graphic, tearing open throats and gunning down anyone in her way. The action feels more personal in this game. The combat allows for more close quarters action, and the gunplay feels more weighty in its power. Compared to Joel, who beats and breaks his opponents into submission, Ellie slices and dices her opponents and doesn't leave them an opportunity to fight back. She doesn't enjoy killing. Her hands constantly shake, and she comes to regret her actions, such as with Mel and Owen. But in the moment, these aren't people to her, just targets to put down. A job to finish, a promise to fulfill. This promise is what leaves her scarred both emotionally and physically. As we turn to the last topic of the day, let's define what monophobia is. Also known as autophobia, this is a phobia where someone is afraid of being alone. When you have monophobia, you experience extreme anxiety when you're alone. This can be strong enough to impact your daily life and your relationships with others. Monophobia doesn't look the same for everyone. This fear can be tied to being separated from a particular person, being in public by yourself, or in the case of Ellie, long-term loneliness. Monophobia is attributed to the fear that comes with loneliness. It's not just a bad case of feeling lonely, but an intense fear and/or anxiety that comes with this lonely feeling. Currently, monophobia isn't listed in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The most recent DSM-5 is essentially a catalog of mental disorders. It provides clear, highly detailed definitions of mental health conditions. It's kinda like a Pokédex, but for this, you don't want to catch them all. Now, the DSM isn't exactly perfect. It has its own issues despite being a primary resource for many in the mental health field. For example, a big change that happened in transitioning the newest publication is that gender identity disorder was eliminated from the DSM-5 and replaced with gender dysphoria. This change means that the focus of the diagnosis is now on the gender identity related distress that some trans people experience, rather than on the individual themselves. Even homosexuality was listed in the DSM up until 1973, but that was eventually removed. So as you can see, science isn't always right on the first try. The queer rights movement helped deliver a paradigm shift that being queer isn't a mental disorder, but rather just another natural way of life. With Ellie, I'm sure her fear of being alone can be attributed to everything we've mentioned today. She hasn't had any parental figures to guide her in life. Everyone that she's known or cared for has been killed or infected. Even with her partner Dina, we can see the fear in Ellie's eyes that what happened to Riley can very well happen to Dina. Her love life is always brought into question. There was a time that Ellie feared kissing someone might cause them to be infected. As for Joel, her adopted parental figure, after his passing, the hope for a normal life fades away. Her future revolved around Joel. If he left Jackson, she'd follow. Essentially, she's Joel's shadow. Wherever he is, she'll be right behind him. From practicing her marksmanship, teaching her guitar, and being Ellie's connection into what the world once was, Joel meant everything. Now that he's gone, the world of what was has faded, and all that's left is a future haunted by her lost loves. There's a survivor's guilt here that's at odds with her monophobia. Ellie seeks solace in the comfort of people who she can trust, but at the same time, by opening up to others, she invites the catch-22 of, yes, she has a group that is vulnerable as all the others in her life. She wants people, but can't stand the idea of losing another person. We witness Ellie's sleepless nights and her intense dread of the world as it closes in around her, all of which are symptoms of monophobia and the process of grieving. As we mentioned in my previous video with Daryl Dixon, when you lose a loved one, your entire brain has to rework its neural pathways. The simple act of waking up and starting your day has to be refreshed. Ellie can't wake up anymore and expect Joel to be there to say good morning. Even playing guitar is an activity that embodies the spirit of Joel. With her people gone, Ellie can expect to feel agoraphobic. Public spaces like Jackson may make her all the more uncomfortable being surrounded by the ghosts of her past loved one. Moving to the farm and living with Dina and JJ was her best option, but now with them gone, not much is left for Ellie. Tommy, the one other person who understands what she's going through, has his own issues at hand and is yet another reminder of what she's lost. We don't get to see what happens next with Ellie. We are left with the lasting image of her in her abandoned home, unable to play guitar because of the injuries she has sustained fighting Abby. Playing the guitar was a way to reconnect with Joel, and that's no longer possible. But even so, this is not her end. She perseveres through her struggle and continues moving forward each day, even in the face of hopelessness. So, what did you think of this assessment? Ellie is a tragic hero who concludes the cycle of revenge by letting go, and now she's left to live with the consequences. In this universe, there's not much hope for a brighter future ahead, but even so, this hasn't stopped Ellie before. The entirety of Part 2 consists of showcasing the trauma that Ellie has sustained in the series. Even in the happiest moments, it's overshadowed by the knowledge that everything we see with Joel is just a flashback. The happy undertones are covered in stark reminders of what awaits their future. Ellie is a stoic character who keeps her emotions close to her heart until she is forced to come to terms with them. Ashley Johnson does an amazing job in showcasing the love, heartbreak, and sharpness that is Ellie Williams. She has won multiple awards for both her roles in the TV show and video game series, and has set a high bar for Bella Ramsey to reach as they continue Ellie's path. Here's hoping for a Part 3 in the future. Thank you all so much for watching. Is there another character from media or film you'd want to discuss? Feel free to leave any recommendations below. Once again, I'm Moone, and this has been Psychology Unbound with Ellie Williams. See you next time.